On July 17, 1955, Disneyland opened its gates for the first time. Fireworks, cameras, 28,000 people. ABC broadcast it live, the first major theme park opening in television history. Ronald Reagan was one of the hosts. Frank Sinatra was in the crowd. It was called the happiest day in American entertainment. Walt Disney was not there. He had died 7 months earlier, alone in a hospital room. Lung cancer. He was 65 years old. The man who had spent the last decade of his life obsessing over every detail of his park, the angle of the castle, the smell of the bakery on Main Street pumped through the ventilation system to make visitors hungry, the fact that no point in the park should have a sight line to the outside world so guests could never be reminded they were in California and not in a fantasy, never walked through the gates on opening day, never saw the lines, never heard the children, never saw what he built actually work. But here is the thing that most people don't know. Walt Disney almost didn't build Disneyland at all. And the reason he almost didn't, the reason he had to fight for years to make it happen, the reason everyone around him thought he was losing his mind, tells you everything about how the thing that looks like an obvious success looked, from the inside, like certain disaster. Walt Disney in 1950 was one of the most successful men in Hollywood. Snow White, Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo, Bambi, Cinderella. He had built the most recognizable animation studio in the world from nothing. From a garage in Kansas City, from a character named Oswald the Lucky Rabbit that a studio executive stole from him, from a mouse he drew on a train ride home after losing everything. He had won more Academy Awards than any other individual in history. His name was on everything. And he was broke. Not personally broke. The studio was in constant financial crisis. Animation was extraordinarily expensive. Each film took years and cost millions. Disney's studio had nearly gone bankrupt during World War II when the government requisitioned his facilities for military training films. The studio survived on government contracts, and barely. By 1950, Disney had two things: a famous name and a company that ran on the edge of collapse. He needed something new. The idea came, as his ideas often did, from watching his daughters. Disney had a habit on Sundays of taking his daughters Sharon and Diane to Griffith Park in Los Angeles, to the merry-go-round, to the small amusements there. And every Sunday, he would sit on a bench while his daughters rode the carousel, eating a hot dog, watching and thinking, there should be a place where parents and children can have fun together, not a fairground. Not an amusement park with rides that made you sick and carnies who cheated you and grounds that smelled of garbage. Something different. Something clean. Something where the fantasy was total and the experience was designed from the ground up. He started sketching. Everyone told him it was a terrible idea. His brother Roy, his financial partner, the man who had kept the studio alive through every crisis for 30 years, told him no. The studio couldn't afford it. The risk was too great. Roy was the numbers man. The numbers said disaster. His own board of directors told him no. His bankers told him no. The city of Burbank, where he first wanted to build, told him no. They didn't want the traffic. The entertainment industry told him he was crazy. Amusement parks were dirty, dangerous, low-class operations. No respectable company built them. Walt Disney building a theme park was like a Michelin-starred chef opening a hot dog stand. Architects told him the concept was unbuildable. His layout, the hub-and-spoke design with the castle at the center and themed lands radiating outward, had never been done before. Nobody knew if it would work. The budget estimates kept climbing. First $5 million, then $10 million, then $17 million. Each time the number went up, another person told him to stop. He didn't stop. He mortgaged his house. He borrowed against his life insurance policy. He sold his vacation home in Palm Springs. He created a separate company, WED Enterprises, to develop the park outside the studio structure, specifically so Roy couldn't shut it down. And then he made the deal that saved Disneyland and changed American media forever. He went to television. In 1954, television was new and the major Hollywood studios were treating it as the enemy. They refused to sell their old films to TV networks. They refused to produce content for television. They believed, correctly, in the short term, that TV was eating their box office. Disney did the opposite. He walked into ABC, the smallest and most desperate of the three major networks, and offered them a deal. Disney would produce a weekly television show called Disneyland. In exchange, ABC would invest $500,000 in the park and guarantee loans of up to $4.5 million. ABC said yes immediately. The Disneyland TV show launched in October 1954. It was an instant hit. Every week, 20 to 30 million Americans watched. The show promoted the park before it opened. The park made people want to watch the show. It was the first integrated media franchise in history, decades before anyone used that term. The money from ABC, combined with everything Disney had borrowed and mortgaged, was enough to build the park. Barely. Construction of Disneyland was a controlled disaster. The site in Anaheim, 17 miles south of Los Angeles, in the middle of orange groves, was chosen because the land was cheap and the new freeway system would bring visitors from all over Southern California. Disney bought the land through a series of fake companies so sellers wouldn't raise the price when they found out who was buying. Construction began in August 1954. The park was supposed to open in July 1955, 11 months later. 11 months to build something that had never existed before. The contractors had never built anything like it. The specifications Disney and his team provided were unlike anything in conventional construction. The rivers of America needed to hold water. It leaked. The castle needed to look medieval, but be built on a California budget. The Jungle Cruise needed to feel authentic while being entirely artificial. The tunnels under the park, the famous utilidors that allowed cast members to move between areas without being seen by guests, had to be dug and constructed while the park was being built on top. It rained that winter, the worst California winter in years. The site turned to mud. The schedule slipped. The budget exploded past its limits. In June 1955, 1 month before opening, Disney walked the site and reportedly broke down. The park wasn't finished. The asphalt on Main Street was still wet. The Mark Twain riverboat, his centerpiece attraction, was sitting incomplete. The Fantasyland dark rides weren't working. He pushed the opening date back by 2 weeks, then pushed it back again, then opened anyway. Opening day, July 17, 1955, was a catastrophe. Counterfeit tickets had been printed. Instead of the 15,000 invited guests, 28,000 people showed up. The park's infrastructure was not designed for that many people. The food ran out by noon. The drinking fountains didn't work. Disney had been forced to choose between plumbing for drinking water and plumbing for the bathrooms, and had chosen bathrooms. Women's heels sank into the still soft asphalt on Main Street. A gas leak closed Fantasyland for most of the day. The Mark Twain riverboat was so overloaded it nearly sank. The press was brutal. Reporters called it Black Sunday. One newspaper said Disneyland was a $2.50 dream that turned into a nightmare. And then the park opened to the public the next day, and the day after that, and by the end of the first week it was clear that something unprecedented had happened. People loved it, not despite its imperfections, or maybe partly because of them, because it felt real and alive rather than slick and corporate. The families who came in those first weeks had never experienced anything like it, a place where the fantasy was total, where every detail was considered, where the outside world genuinely disappeared. Within its first year, Disneyland had 1 million visitors. Within 3 years, it had paid off every debt Disney had taken on to build it. Within a decade, it had generated more money than every Disney film combined. Walt Disney spent the last years of his life planning something bigger. He had bought 43 square miles of land in Florida, twice the size of Manhattan, in secret, again through fake companies, again so sellers wouldn't know who was buying. He called it Project X internally. It would become Walt Disney World. He also had a more radical vision, a planned city he called Epcot, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. Not a theme park, an actual city. 20,000 residents, monorails, climate-controlled streets, no cars, a laboratory for urban planning that the entire world could study and copy. He was 63 years old, and he had never been more ambitious. In November 1966, he went to the hospital for a knee operation, an old polo injury. The X-rays showed something else. Lung cancer. He had smoked his entire adult life. The doctors told him he had 6 months to a year. He didn't make 6 months. On December 15, 1966, Walt Disney died in the hospital. He was 65 years old. The last thing he reportedly did was stare at the ceiling of his hospital room, which he had covered with a grid to help him plan the layout of the Florida project, and point, showing someone, or no one, where something was supposed to go. Disneyland opened its gates for the first time without him. Walt Disney World opened in 1971. Someone asked Roy Disney, who had spent 40 years saying no to his brother's ideas and then making them happen anyway, what he thought Walt would have said about it. Roy reportedly said, "Walt would have been fine with it. He could see it all in his head long before we built it." Walt Disney's vision of Epcot, the actual city, was never built. What opened in 1982 under that name was a theme park. The city died with him. Nobody else understood it well enough to build it. He died 65 years old, having changed American entertainment, American childhood, American media, and the very concept of what a designed experience could be. He never saw opening day. He never walked through the gates as a visitor. He never stood in the crowd and watched the fireworks. The man who built the happiest place on earth never got to be happy in it. He was too busy building the next thing. There is something that Disney said in the last years of his life that his employees remembered long after he was gone. He said, "Disneyland will never be finished. As long as there is imagination left in the world, it will keep growing." He didn't mean it as a business strategy. He meant it as a warning, or maybe a confession. Because the thing about Walt Disney, the thing that made him build something nobody believed in, mortgage his house, fight his brother, ignore every expert who told him to stop, was that he genuinely could not see the finished version. He could only see what was missing. Every time something was completed, he was already looking at the gap between what existed and what could exist. That's what kept him building. That's also what kept him from ever being satisfied. The man who built the happiest place on earth never found it. He was always just arriving.